Hello, there we go. Welcome everybody to another wonderful Thursday evening. We're going to be talking tonight about one-on-one conversations, and I have an incredible group with myself this evening. Um, Xavier, we all know and love, so I'm just going to kick it to Xavier to introduce himself first, since that's a familiar face to us all. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Xavier. Stop sound. Hold on 1 second. Uh, it was great what Xavier just said, and I'm so sorry that all of y'all who are watching just missed out on it. Okay, can you try again, Xavier? Nope, hold on. Ugh. This is why Twitch is the bane of my existence. Hold on. Oh, you do? You hear me, but not, but they can't hear you, is the issue. You saying testing? Okay, hold on. It's a new thing every week. It's a new thing every week. Okay, can somebody say something now? God damn it, what the fuck? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh boy. I've never had this issue before. Oh my god. Y'all, Twitch is just such a thing. It's such a thing. And then it mutes my headphones for some reason. Audio input? That's a microphone. Oh, I fucking hate this.
Something real quick, Xavier. Hey, just throw the whole thing in the trash.
did it. We made it. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
What? There we go. Oh, should I put a fun background up? I've got this desk here. It makes me look official,
Mm.
but I think it'll be good to do. I did this for the card signing. Maybe it won't work.
It's just making you disappear.
I know. I'm just gonna turn it off. Though. I drew this during the.
All right. We're gonna restart this thing. Apologies again for all the audio issues, and now that I've fixed it, I also have to redo the entire setup that I spent like 20 minutes setting up before this. So please, just bear with us while I get this all set up. Look at that. You're gonna see my whole. Oh my god. It's like one of those funhouse mirror rooms. It does, doesn't it? We are troubleshooters. Every week it's something new. I just love we're doing it live every week. I just love surprises. I love messing around with technology and having a really challenging time every time I start something up. But okay, welcome everybody to another Twitch stream. We're finally gonna get at it. Let me get this out of here. Welcome. You can see part of my OBS setup. I can't be bothered. I can't be bothered. Okay, welcome. Let's start over. All that matters is we're here. Let's start over. This song is from Bucky O'Hare, Fearless Sun, but it might have been from Blaster Master previous to this. I am playing a sweet mix of the 150 best NES music tracks right now, so I could certainly send you the link to the video if you're interested. But welcome everybody. Today we're talking about one-on-one conversations, because that is really the basis of our movement is us talking to our coworkers. So how do we do it? How do we get it done? But of course, I would love to reintroduce again my group of folks who are so kindly joining me this week. So I'll pass it to Xavier to say hello and introduce himself to you.
It's
Fuck
weird.
me.
I've been doing this. I've been
Hold
doing
on.
this for so.
Hold on. I'm sorry.
Oh no.
God, Xavier.
Ah.
Guys, we're gonna get this. We're gonna get this. Okay,
Am I audible
now
now?
you should be able to hear everybody.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, Xavier,
Okay.
introduce yourself,
Hey!
please.
Hi, I'm Xavier. I'm a 3D character artist. I've been working in video games for over a dozen years. I do all kinds of weird stuff. Like, I started out as a character artist, and now I'm doing things that involve technology, and that's horrifying and bad. Uh, but on the bright side, it means that other people don't have to touch it, and that's good. I like that. Um, and yeah, I mean, if you ask me what I do, it changes on a daily basis these days because I've been doing this for so long that I just kind of know how most of the art stuff works and how it plugs into the technology. So, um, yeah, it's kind of my role in games is kind of hard to define, and it mostly just involves talking to people these days, which is a good fit for what we're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Patience of a saint for dealing with all the issues we always have on every stream. But welcome, Xavier. So glad to have you. I
Yeah,
would also
good
love to
Peter.
introduce Dan Pinto and Smo, who are both here from the Titmouse New York campaign. Hi, Dan. Hi, Smo. Dan, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan. I am a storyboard artist at Titmouse currently, but I've been in the animation industry for now 15, 16 years, something like that. And I've worked as an animator, designer, director, all sorts of stuff. Yeah, and myself, along with Chrissy and Smo, we're all part of the organizing committee and then negotiating committee to some degree of Titmouse New York and our push to unionize the studio.
Yeah. Glad to have you, Dan. You're one of the stewards now for the New York studio, correct?
I am. I'm one of two shop stewards for the New York studio.
Awesome. And Smo, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
I would. I was really excited to get my welcome email from Dan, actually, from the guild.
That's awesome.
Hello, I'm Smo. I'm a traditional animator. I've worked in New York animation for 17 years, and since the 1980s, we hadn't had a union in New York City for animation. So being part of Titmouse, their union effort, or our union effort, was like really cool, really exciting, because we had to build something from ground up, which I think is a lot similar to what games people are experiencing. And Dan actually wasn't part of the organizing committee. I was lucky enough to be voted in to the negotiation committee, but a lot of the same tactics that we're going to talk about today apply. So I was, after the initial organizing, I came in to be part of the contract negotiations, which was a long process, but very fulfilling. So I'm happy to be here.
Stoked to have you here, Smo. Also, Stussy 5150, I say hello to Iggy in the chat. I think Iggy stepped on Stussy's keyboard. So today we're talking about the one-on-one conversation, because I feel like a lot of people who might tune in to our streams or who are even interested in the idea of unionizing, the biggest step is that first conversation you have. And some people just don't know how to have it or what the point of it is. But we have to figure out what people think about unions in order to achieve our supermajority level of support. And as a reminder, if you haven't tuned into previous streams, or you're new to the idea of organizing under the IITSE in general, our goal is to hit an 80% supermajority of support. And that number is pretty high. And the reason why it's so high is for multiple reasons, but first and foremost, it shows that we're a strong, unified group, and we have strength in numbers. We have power in numbers. So the more of us that are on board, the better. So again, we attempt to achieve that 80% supermajority support. Of course, sometimes we're a little shy of that. Sometimes we're way over it. Like in the case of Working Man over on this side of me, we had 85% support when we went forward with our union. And then when we voted, we had even more, which is awesome. And we won unanimously for our union. So, what is the purpose of a one-on-one? Does anybody want to answer that?
I'll go, since nobody else is going.
Great.
A one-on-one conversation is a great way to kind of get the temperature of the room on an individual level, so that you can find out how much someone is in support of the idea of a union in your workplace. And it's also a great way to educate them about what a union is, how a union can work, how to do a union thing, etc., etc.
Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got a PDF I can read off of. So in organizing conversation, while you can also use it to take the temperature, it's also a conversation specifically constructed to move a person. And the conversation itself has a purpose and an ask. And there's a whole bunch of steps and structure we can get into, but the beyond the step where you do want to take the temperature, you can actually move someone with this conversation toward your common goal, is sort of how I like to think about it.
Yeah. And just a caveat on that, moving does not mean twisting their arm or convincing. It's more of like educating people about their options and letting them know that maybe a union is the solution to your problems. So those are all great. The other thing about one-on-ones that is also really important is addressing people's fears around unionism. What might your boss do? What are they afraid that your boss might do? And how can we help them process that and move forward from it? But it's also building unity with coworkers who are very different from you, either working in different sectors of your employer or people you've never talked to before. I talked to so many people I didn't know at Titmouse. How about you, Dan? Did you?
Yeah, one of the great parts about it is you introduce yourself, especially during our one-on-ones. So much of our studio was remote, and so much of it were new hires who had never been in the studio with us before. So introducing yourself to a new group of people who, I would otherwise never really talk to. One of the other things, as you were talking about the points of the one-on-one conversation, one other thing was the idea of clearing up misconceptions about unions and what they can and can't do, right? I remember during some of my one-on-ones hearing people say, like, I just thought New York I just thought you couldn't have one. Like, there's like New York Animation just can't have a union. I was like, oh, no, we can if you want one. It's just a matter of, knowing. And clearing up things about, people often have questions about how dues work, or like, can a union prevent me from getting fired, or all that kind of stuff, right? So clearing up that kind of stuff and it was a huge part of the one-on-ones when I was having them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I found like talking to coworkers I had never talked to before to be one of the most rewarding things, because you get to know people that you otherwise wouldn't. And that's not for any other reason than you're just busy or you're working on your team and you just don't have the ability to talk to them outside of like the one Christmas party a year, especially when you're working fully remote,
And the other thing
new
about
hires. No, go ahead.
The other thing about Titmouse specifically is, like, I don't know how Smo, if you felt like this, but I often felt like at Titmouse the individual productions were also so segmented. Like, I feel like even when I was in the studio, I was never talking to people who were outside of my show, really, unless I knew them from some other sort of job. So it was nice to kind of break that and kind of actually talk to people who I would otherwise not talk to.
Yeah.
And then people in different departments on top of that too. Sometimes it's hard to, like, especially a different department on a different show. It's like there's no opportunity to run into somebody because you're not in the same meetings at all. And when we're only Zoom, there's just like no way to know who's even there because there's you're just not in the same Google chat as everybody else. So it's a good way to really connect with everybody.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
noticed the exact same thing in games as well, especially working at larger companies or even a smaller company that might have multiple small projects. Like even if you're working in the same space or like a similar space where it's like just a couple of rooms adjacent to each other, if you're not working on the same project all the time, or if you're in a different department that like as somebody who's on the art team, I'm probably not going to be talking to many, say, engineers or whatever. It's hard to open those lines of communication because they're just simply doing completely different stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's touching on something that Fearless Sun in the chat is bringing up, which is the segmentation is a big thing. I'm not sure how to overcome, and that's true, Fearless Sun. I think when we get started with an organizing campaign, thinking about how you have to reach out to groups that you've never reached out to before is something that can be kind of daunting. But contacting an organizer to help you strategize how to get in touch with those coworkers is super helpful. I know maybe like Dan can attest to that we spent a lot of time in our organizing committee meetings figuring out how to get contact information from people and who to reach out to. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Dan?
Yeah, by utilizing the power of the 10 or so folks who were in our organizing committee, we sort of had a network that sort of was lucky enough to be broad enough to touch sort of every person who was involved at the studio. So if they were on one production, we had someone who was on that production in our team. If we were looking reaching out to a designer, there was a designer on our team who could reach out, who had like some kind of common ground. But the funny part about all this stuff is even when there were a handful of folks who we were cold calling them because they were, new to the industry or no one had any previous experience with them in any other studio, most of them were more than happy to just say, "Hi, yeah, let's talk," because they want that sort of interpersonal relationship of some kind, and most of them were more than willing to chat about their feelings about the job, about animation in general, the workforce in general, all that kind of stuff. So it sounds more. I think it sounds more overwhelming than it actually is in reality. Most people are more than willing to talk to you about the problems they have at work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found the exact same thing in games, like especially when going to say a convention or something where people are bouncing between lots of different talks and stuff. But I mean, you're in the same industry. You're all doing things that are related to one another, even if you're say in different departments. And so, in general, if you go and you talk to somebody who is either at your company or at another company that's doing similar stuff, I mean, there's some automatic sort of built-in common interests and common things that you can always talk about. And that's one of the things that I've found to be really helpful when just approaching new people who I know I need to talk to, but I don't really know what to do. It's just like, oh wait, we both do the same thing. I can just bring that up and then guide the conversation in the direction that I'm interested in talking to them about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the biggest things to think about before you even get started with your one-on-one is the concept of listening. And listening can take a lot of different forms, right? But making sure that you are active and listening to the person that's talking to you during these conversations is so important. And I think one of the best ways that I personally listen to folks is to not only like look at them. I know this is like a wild concept, like having to listen. But it is really important because we can all get really distracted. But like calling back to the things that they're talking about, like somebody's talking to you about how they have issues at work and like, oh, I can't get a raise. And like, I've asked like 4 times and they still won't give it to me. Be like, yeah, I completely understand how like getting a raise at this company seems a bit obtuse. Like, what do you think we could do about that? So like kind of confirming that you're listening by like repeating things back to them and not in like a patronizing way. Like there was that episode of South Park with Jimmy trying to date women, and he would just say, "That's very interesting. Please tell me more." And like, that's not fully listening. But what do you all think about that? What's listening like for you?
I think a big part of it. Oh wait, did we both start at the same time?
No, you're
You
good.
can go ahead.
Oh, I was listening. I don't know what y'all.
Please
Go ahead,
continue.
Swan. Yeah.
I think a big part of it is, so like I said, this is a conversation with a purpose and there's a structure to it, which helps. So it's not just a random catch up, and you're not just like, I gotta call this person, I don't know what I'm gonna say. So I think part of the listening for me is asking open-ended questions and then asking follow-up questions. So if somebody says, oh, I'm really stressed out at work, you can say, well, what's stressing you out? Instead of like, I know the boss is a jerk. You don't want to like throw something at them or make an assumption. You let them speak and just kind of continue to let them speak until, you find a point where you can kind of get to the next step and tell them what the plan is, like what you're thinking about, why. You start out by telling them why you're talking to them, so they're not just like, what the hell is Smo doing talking to me? Who's this guy? But so they already know there's a reason. But asking those open-ended questions and asking the follow-ups and getting more information, and you can take notes, and then you can circle back later in the conversation, a little callback, and be like, well, earlier you said you're really stressed out, and so maybe that break time is a good idea, or whatever. Just kind of bring stuff back around, and just kind of keep them going, like let them think.
Totally. And I think
Yeah,
one
and
thing.
people. Oh, please go
Sorry,
ahead.
Xavier. I was just going to
No,
say the
go
one
ahead.
thing that you touched on that I think is also really important is note taking. Because you do want to be able to recall some of this stuff, because you're going to continue to talk to these people many, many times. So making sure that you can like recall the things that they did talk to you about not only shows that, and yes, Fearless Son, I would consider that to be called active listening. But being able to recall the things that you talked about before not only shows that you listened the first time, but that you also like took it in. So I always take notes. I'm a note taker myself. Xavier, what were you going to add?
Oh, I was just going to note that when you're talking to somebody and like if you're taking notes or you're trying to drive the conversation in a specific direction, um, being able to relate in a way that says, oh, I'm experiencing the same thing too, even if it's in a different context. Especially for things like organizing and trying to get people on the same page about certain information or practices or whatever, it's always going to be more helpful if you can say, oh, yes, I understand where you're coming from because of X, Y, and Z. What's your experience like with that thing? Or you could say something like, "Oh, this is my experience, but have you run into something like this? Uh, is it different for you?" Because people love to talk about their experiences and love to talk about themselves, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're being like self-centered. It's just like people are always speaking only from their position, so you have to acknowledge that and then encourage them to do that more. And you can not necessarily lead them to something, but you can present your experience in such a way that they can understand something that they might not have before, whether it's something about organizing or something as simple as just something you need to talk about for work. I think it's the way that I've thought about it when we've done phone banking and talking to people about their experiences at their workplaces has always been, oh, how can I relate to what this person is talking about? How can I bring up something to show that I have experienced something similar and relate to them so that they are more willing to open up and talk to me more?
Absolutely. You want to add anything to that, Dan?
I was thinking when you were talking about the note taking, the Titmouse OC had a Google Google Doc a spreadsheet with all the notes we had taken for when we spoke to folks, outlining their like top priority items, what departments they were in, things like that. And so you could reference back that when you followed up with someone, and clarify. So it's not just like a million scraps of paper everywhere, right? You can always follow up and be like, all right, what was the thing we were talking about? Okay, last time we talked about having more vacation time. All right, so now when you do your follow up, which is inevitable, you can circle back to some of the things you had from before and kind of refresh yourself on that. So it was nice having a central place where all the organizing committee members could see all the notes at once and see not only for individuals, but like trends across the studio, what people in general felt towards, the different aspects of working.
Oh, I think Yaron's going to join us. Okay.
Gonna have to adjust your OBS settings again.
No, I think we should be good. I'm just going to send him the Zoom.
No. One more
No,
thing
we'll be fine.
regarding the active listening thing. One thing, I don't know, maybe Smo and Xavier, I want to ask if you guys felt this afterwards. Did you find that it helped like your conversations outside of organizing? Because I found myself having like much more like deeper and more active conversations with like my wife and my brothers and stuff. And I didn't expect that to happen, but I found like my like ability to empathize and like be open to other people's like, I don't know, just in conversation in general, I found it to be a lot more, I don't know, open to just listening to folks.
Yeah, I mean, at least for me, I feel like it's just good practice for talking. But I'm also, I also sit in front of a computer for at least 8 hours a day, screaming at Unreal or Photoshop or whatever. And that's not exactly great practice for having a conversation. So just talking to anybody in general, I think helps with it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think Dan did a lot more one-on-ones than I did. I wasn't I let my social anxiety get ahead of me a couple of times, but the more I did it, the easier it got. And having that structure helped. I found it was almost easier with people I didn't know. And the thing that I carried with me was framing the semantics of it. So saying things like you and your coworkers working together are really centering someone else. And I think I had a hard time shutting that part off in the rest of my life. And I was like, oh my God, I have to think about myself too. But,
You're like, you and your coworkers need a coffee.
Yeah, it's really nice to, the way you speak to someone is powerful. And really addressing someone specifically, like if you're addressing a room, I can say you, and I'm addressing every listener, and you don't have to always include yourself. And I think that really helps get people's attention and really kind of like helps people zero in on what you're saying, because you are centering them, you are finding out what their needs are. And that's the kind of stuff that helped me in like public speaking, and now as a teacher, that's actually really helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, welcome Yaron to the chat. Thank you so much for joining. Would you like to give a little intro for yourself?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I'm
Oh, it's totally
midstream.
fine.
But hi, my name is Yaron Farkash. I'm a member of the Animation Guild. I'm currently storyboard artist at Sony Pictures Animation. I guess with Xavier and Chrissy, just working or helping, I guess, forming a game worker unions and stuff like that. Sorry, it's not a good intro.
That's a great intro.
But yeah, nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, Yaron, this is Smo and Dan from the Titmouse New York organizing effort. And Smo and Dan, this is Yaron from the Animation Guild, and he's helping with the video games effort. So big group today. I love it. So we were just talking about one-on-ones, and you got here just in time because we were about to start talking about how we break this down. So the first step, amazingly enough, to getting to a one-on-one conversation is having the meeting, setting it up with a coworker. So, and that sounds like nothing, but it's a pretty big step. So anybody have any thoughts on like what you have done in the past to get a coworker to sit down and talk to you one-on-one?
Somebody else is gonna have to do this, guys.
I mean,
Somebody's
I'll
gonna
do
have to
it.
do it.
I'm just waiting for Dan.
Sorry, I was gonna go through my email to see how I started off with my cold email to folks to see if I could find one. But it was pretty much like I remember I can't find one off the top of my head. But I remember the initial email to set it up was pretty straightforward. Like, hey, do you want to talk about stuff at work?
Mhm.
Like, I don't know. I don't remember being too like cagey or anything like that. I remember being quite straightforward. I mean, the email is not like, hey, do you want to start a union? The email is like, hey, do you want to talk about work stuff? Or hey, welcome to Titmouse. I work here. Do you want to chat a little bit about work stuff? And then that just kind of gets the ball rolling. I think I find folks are more than willing to talk about issues they have at work. I mean, I think it's the 90% of the discussions I have with my coworkers are problems they have at work, right?
Truth. Anybody else have thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
I think like on top of that, having a specific ask, at least later in the process, like in the negotiating committee, having a specific ask, or like a reason that you're having the conversation, like talking about work is enough. But yeah, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself actually. But like having a specific thing you're doing, like, oh, we have a petition, we have a survey, something like that, is also helpful. There's a purpose to the conversation. Like there's a reason you're randomly talking to somebody. But as I think Dan hit the nail on the head, like everybody's at work. Everybody has to be at work because we're trapped in capitalism. So everybody's got something to say about it, good or bad. So
Yeah,
there you go.
totally. It can be real simple, just like that. Just, hey, coworker, I want to know how you're feeling about work. Do you have time to talk? If you're in person, even better. Hey, coworker, you want to grab a coffee, stretch your legs, take a walk, get some fresh air? I want to talk to you about something. Real simple. I think oftentimes we tend to overcomplicate things, and this could be very standard. But also, just to mention, you don't want to be reaching out to people through, like, you want to be able to reach out to them through either their personal email or their personal phone number. If you've got like a work Slack and you want to like ping someone real quick, be like, hey, coworker, can I get your email? I want to talk to you about something. Or can I get your phone number? I want to hit you up about something. That's fine, but you don't want to be like organizing conversations through Slack or through your work email, because you never know who's reading it. Fearless Sun asks, is this something it's better to be direct about? You want to talk about work outside of work, or something it's better to be a bit more deniable? Want to chat over a game outside of work? What do y'all think?
I mean, it's also like I feel like hopefully your coworkers and you kind of know the temperature of each coworker. I would say the people that maybe you can be more direct with about certain things, or people who are more clueless about union things and stuff like that. Maybe you have to slowly, I would say, introduce certain topics, or too, and stuff like that. So at least personally, I don't think there's like a complete like blanket thing that, oh, for every person in the world that you work with you can talk this way, because every person is is different, you know.
Yeah, I found that when I'm trying to have a specific conversation with somebody at work, that's maybe about work, but not something that I want to have, say, the paper trail that, management or whoever can follow to be like, oh, are they trying to organize, or what are they do? Are they trying to come up with like a complaint for something, whatever, something that's going to affect management or HR or something. I usually like to say, hey, do you want to grab lunch today or get coffee today, or do you want to go and play a game if it's like somebody I know online or something along those lines? Or are you on Discord? Can I add you as a friend on Discord? Something like that, just so that it can be like outside of that environment. So I'm sure that if we have something that's kind of sensitive to discuss, it's in a more discreet environment, I guess. I mean, you certainly have to be careful with that type of discussion because you don't want to come across the wrong way, especially if there's a power dynamic involved. Like I've been in management before, and unless you have a certain level of trust, that's not something you necessarily want to do with somebody who's on your team. But usually saying something along the lines of like, hey, I don't want to clog up the work chat. Are you on Discord or something is usually fine for something like that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I wouldn't do is kind of like bait somebody with bait them with something that it's not what it's about. So being like, hey, coworker, I'd love to know how to use that program that you use. Can you teach me? Because that's not the real reason you're meeting, right? So being direct.
Yeah, being direct and focusing it more on like the social element, I would say, at least for me, has been more successful, especially if I want to talk about an issue at work. Because once you're in a social situation, there's not that expectation that you're going to be like talking about one thing, like what you just mentioned about like, hey, can you teach me this program? That's going to be a very focused conversation. But if you just want to have a not necessarily unfocused conversation, but a conversation that can go in other directions, that's where I've found that it's best to frame it in some other more casual way.
Totally. Somebody just wrote a really long comment that got truncated on my stream. Guessing something like a Discord server might help, not as an organizing thing, but as a kind of stay in touch outside work device as people inevitably move on. Yeah, it gives a potential point of contact outside of the context of work. Totally. Discord is a great tool. We used it for our organizing at Titmouse. It was a way to keep people informed and a way for the organizing committee to communicate in between our weekly scheduled meetings about anything that might come up. So it can be really helpful. Great. Well, now that we've... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to, like I think at the end of the day, it's really kind of like if you just mesh together what Dan and Snow said. It's like people like to complain about their work, any work party, any excuse, and that I think gives you the temperature too of people, and yeah, basically just be upfront when you do want to talk to somebody. You're not trying to trick them. You're not trying to sell them something. I mean, you are trying to bring them towards a certain idea and a certain realization. But yeah, and with something actionable, like Smo said, because it's all good to vent about your work, but it is at the end of the day about doing something about it.
Yes.
So,
yes. We're not
like,
just...
is there a meeting? Is there a survey to fill? Is there another person that also is feeling the same way and start moving the needle? So
yeah, and that's definitely a part of the conversation, and it's one of the last things, but we will talk about tasking. But so we got through the first step, we set up the meeting. Great. Now what? Now the first thing you want to do is say, hi, how are you? And what are we here to talk about? So who are you and why are we meeting today? So Xavier, so glad to have you today. I just wanted to talk to you more about what your thoughts are on how we could change things at work.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What did you have in mind? I mean, I've got a lot of thoughts, especially since I started recently and things have kind of hit the fan. What did you have in mind?
Great. So it's that part's real easy. So we've gotten through setting up the meeting, introing yourself. Who are you? Why are you there? You want to make sure that you say who you are. Of course, they might know you. They might not know you. They might have never met you at work, especially if you're working in a remote workplace. They might have never actually met you. But why are you meeting today? You're meeting to talk about what are the issues at work and how we could fix them. We, right? Not just you, us together. So then the next step is, okay, you've asked them how we could fix things. They start thinking, okay, well, what are my issues to begin with? What are the things that I want to see changed? So you're you're identifying their issues. What are their problems at work? And this is really important because it's going to help you further in this conversation, but also when you form your union and are getting into contract negotiations, you want to know what people's priorities are. What are the things that they would like to see changed? But also, this is a very sensitive part of the conversation because some people might be revealing to you a lot of pain. It sometimes can be somewhat of a therapy situation, and that's okay. Anytime I'm having a conversation with somebody and they're like, I'm so sorry that I'm putting this on you, like, I don't mean to make you my therapist. It's like, no, man, that's what I'm here for. That's what we're doing. We're trying to find out what your issues are and solve them together. So what do y'all think about issue identification? Like, what has your experience with people revealing this stuff to you been like?
I think this one has been the easiest part. I think you ask somebody what are three things, if you could change anything at work, what are the three things you would change? And usually people have to think for a minute, but they always come up with something. And then getting details. So that's where like Dan was saying, the note taking is really important. And then kind of like raising, helping them sort of open them up to what's possible a little bit. And maybe if they are mad, sort of directing that, helping them direct that anger to, it's like, oh, it's not your coworkers aren't making that decision, are they? Like, who's the one setting the hours? Like where is this coming from? And even bigger than that, in our industry, who are the 5 companies that own all media? Like, it's not like your direct boss is doing something. They have to answer to Disney and Amazon and Netflix. And like, who's the real top of this pyramid? And like, think about it. And but like, as far as getting those three issues, everybody was always just like, they had something, even if it took them a second to get to it. And usually they had more than 3. And it was hard to come up with just the top ones.
One of the things I found, especially with, I spoke to a lot of new hires at Titmouse, people who this is their first gig in the industry, not just at Titmouse, just at post-graduation, right? Even like anything like that, first job in animation. And a lot of them felt like they kind of had an issue, but didn't really know if it was that big of an issue. And so part of the conversation was sort of understanding, like, well, what are your expectations, and what should your job look like? Like, what is a healthy relationship to work, as opposed to just, I sometimes work on the weekends. It's not that bad. I was like, well, should you work on the weekends? Like, is it? You seem to be downplaying this issue, but is it actually like a bigger issue than you think it is? Like, wouldn't you rather have your weekends to yourself, or your nights, or whatever it is? Things like that was something that I found, especially with younger, newer workers, that they didn't feel, what's the word? They didn't feel not as strong about their issues, but it was more easy for them to couch them and sort of like, that's just the way it is, and having to work a little bit to say like, well, that's the way it is, but is that the way it should be?
And even with more established workers, that's a thing that comes up. One of the big issues in our industry is the outsourcing of labor. And I don't think that's hit games as hard, but a lot of people who've entered the industry maybe a little later than Dan and I have didn't see the transition happen. And so they're like, well, that's just how it works. So what are you so upset about? Until it comes for their job too, which is starting to happen now. So it's hard to get people out of that frame that you almost have to illustrate like, well, wouldn't it be cool if we did all the work in-house? You give them an opportunity to think about how it could work. Like, oh, you do a lot of revisions. Why do you think that is? Wouldn't it be easier if you could just talk to the person sitting next to you? Like it's hard to make those jumps when someone's never had that experience. It's like, what was it, Plato's cave? But like, give them something to think about, show them that things can be better if you and your coworkers work toward that better future. And it's not going to just happen on its own.
Yeah, that like Plato's cave example is also a really great thing to bring up in industries like ours, where people tend to be really passionate about what they're doing, and like they specifically got into the job because they wanted to do it because it's something they feel driven to do. And if you don't contextualize something for, say, a fresh grad who is, working as an intern or something, or just got hired full time at their first gig, if you don't contextualize, hey, this is, you working until 10 p.m. is throwing off the entire schedule because it's making management think that this job gets done in X amount of time, when in reality it should get done in a much longer timeline during normal work hours. Most of these people have no context for that. They have no way of knowing that before somebody actually literally goes and tells them, because they've just been doing that their entire college career. So contextualizing that in this conversation is also something that I've found really important, or even not in just this conversation, but in other conversations where I've been at work, or like I had to pop into work at 10 p.m. because I left something on my desk, and I see somebody working and I'm like, go home, please. You're throwing everything off. And I think that's coming from the perspective of somebody in games where most of the industry is not unionized or anything. People don't even have the resources in general to even know what regular could look like. So I think that's another interesting thing to bring up during that and other conversations, because it's one area where there's just so much, I don't want to say ignorance, but lack of knowledge about those things. So it's I forget where I was going with this. I'm just gonna shut up now.
Well, that's a really good point, though, coming from the college experience into the workforce, especially with people who haven't worked not just general jobs. Like some people haven't had a job before, and I've been working since I was like 14. And so like it's a different experience, and especially when you're in an industry that's related to art, it gets tripped up. I was just showing Dan something I was drawing earlier, and I was redoing the same drawing like for 2 hours. It was really easy to get tripped up and like trying to do your own best artwork, and forget that the longer you stay, if you're only paid for 8 hours, the longer you stay, you start devaluing your labor. And then it's also setting a precedent for everyone around you that that's just how much it's possible to get done. So it's like this double-edged sword where you start making less money per hour because you're putting in more hours, and then management thinks that's just how much you get done. So then they expect, because they don't know you're there, they don't know you're working late, especially when you're working from home. They're just like, cool, it's done. I guess they get that much done in a day. It's like, well, so if you're only getting what you can get done in 8 hours or however long you're paid for, and then stop, which is hard, you're kind of doing yourself and everyone else a favor. But that's a really hard thing to get across, especially like working with college students right now. I teach a 9 o'clock in the morning class tomorrow morning, and there'll be inevitably be people that are like, yeah, I was up until 3 working on my project, and like they just get so used to that. But it's different when money's involved. Like, do that for your own passion projects. Not Don't get ripped off by your job.
Yeah, for sure. I would say. Oh, sorry, Chrissy. But someone in the chat said that they can't hear you.
I muted myself, guys. I'm so good at this. Go ahead, Yaron.
Okay. I mean, I think you just kind of said it. Well, I guess you were muted.
Yeah, maybe just say it again.
Didn't hear, but yeah, it's like, oh, I guess I also like I just want to say, like, even though like my first job, and in general I was fortunate in this business to be consistently working at union studios, under the Animation Guild and stuff. But that like college mentality, like I think everybody brings it from their time in college, like the kind of like you kind of like do all-nighters and crunch and whatever for your own personal project, because there's so much at stake for you when you're in college and stuff. But and I brought that mentality with me to like the workplace, and I think I was lucky that I had good people in my environment that told me like to chill out, and go home and all that kind of stuff. And I think realizing that like you're not really going to work at a studio to make, I mean, you are going to work at a studio to make art because it's what you love and you want to work for your project, but you can make art at home. Like, you don't need a Disney, or you don't need an Activision, or you don't need a whatever to make art. They're not the arbiters of like, or the gatekeepers of who can make art and who cannot make art. You are going because you want to make money off your art, so it is about a paycheck at the end of the day. So yes, and you should be paid, like you should give them what they paid for, and not less but not more either. It's you should be fair for yourself too.
Totally, Yaron. Awesome. Well, we've introduced ourselves. We've found out what your coworkers' issues are, so now what do we do with this information? So the next part of the conversation is to start agitating around their issues. So ask them, like, have you talked to management about this issue? Have you tried to go to HR with this? If so many of us are similar in the idea that this is not working at this company, why do we continue to let it happen? Or why do they continue to let it happen? Why do they continue to not listen to us if so many of us are going to them with these concerns? So you're getting them to start thinking about how, even if we collectively all have the same issue, us going to them as individuals to ask for change is ineffective. Anybody want to share thoughts on that particular part of the conversation?
There have been a handful of times during the one-on-ones I had where I asked folks, have you talked to management about this issue? And the question usually, if like for instance, the ones I remember often were about scheduling and like, there's too much to do and not enough time. I said, have you tried talking to management about what to do? And they said, well, management just says the schedule is the schedule, right? There's no budging. So then it gives you a great opportunity to push in with like, well, does the schedule have to be that way? Like, what can we do? So if you can't do it alone, what's next? How do we change the schedule? Or like, those kind of questions. So it was really actually, I think it was beneficial to the one-on-ones I was having that management was so stubborn in a lot of ways for certain aspects of production. So yeah, so that was really interesting. The other thing was, sorry, as you were talking, I kept thinking about the opportunity to like to rather than tell them the solution, like, rather than say like, yeah, the problem is there's not enough hour. I don't get paid enough, right? You can't just be like, well, union will pay you more. You say like, well, what could change? Like, what would cause them to pay you more? Like, what can we do? As opposed to, you don't feed someone the answer. You ask them to think on their own and figure out what the solutions could be. And that didn't only lead to people realizing, the power of like collective agreements and those kind of things, but also coming up with more interesting ways to prime themselves to do like collective actions and things like that in the future. If we all did this thing, or I could, do this. It was really interesting to watch people's gears turn and try to figure out solutions that involved more collective action.
That's a really great point, Dan.
I found that is helpful in multiple areas, especially if you're working on like a small scrappy team or something where everybody needs to do a little bit of everything. Approaching things from the perspective of, we can't do a thing unless we sort of empower ourselves to do the thing. So how can we build up that power ourselves to do the thing, whatever it is really it's really valuable for teams in general. And having been on lots of kind of small teams where it's like everybody wearing multiple hats and everybody doing lots of different things all at once, once you start to have that type of perspective on the work that you're doing, it's a lot easier to say, hey, maybe we can use this approach in other areas too. And it's been one of the things that I've found is most like effective in getting people to kind of try and work together on their own, like just like they naturally want to work together, is specifically encouraging them to come to their own conclusion about what might work best and then present what they think might work best to the rest of the team. And if you can do that, I granted, again, working in games, not unionized right now, but I think that's one of the general thought processes that has led a lot of people that I know and have worked with to being like, oh yeah, we need a union, guys. We just need to do it. It's the same as everything else we've been doing that's worked well so far. Let's do that thing too, which is part of why I am here right now, because using that same process has led me here.
Absolutely. Xavier, that doughboy in the chat says, agitating is my favorite part of unionizing a house. Would love to know more about your union efforts, that doughboy. Please share in the chat. Yeah, so, the agitation part is like, we're getting them to think about the ideas that they want to see changed and how currently the status quo has made it so that we don't have power to change it. And then we want to do the next step, which is framing it all together. You're letting them know, okay, great. So you have issues, you can't solve them. How can we solve them together? Are these issues that you've raised with your boss before? How did they respond to it? Did they ignore you? Did they brush it under the rug? What do you think would happen if we all came together to try to solve this issue at once? Do you think they would listen to all of us? So ultimately trying to get them to start the wheels turning of like, okay, I don't have the power to make change on an individual level. I can't do it by myself. I've tried and it didn't work. So what can I do? I could join with my coworkers together to ask for these changes because we have power in numbers. Fearless Sun says, people also more likely to be invested in an idea when they can be prompted to realize it was on their own. Yes, that's also a big part of why listening is so important. It gives them a chance to put a voice to their ideas. Absolutely, Fearless Sun. It's like you've done this before. If you've done this before, Fearless Sun, you are a Fearless Sun. But yeah, does anybody have thoughts on like the idea of framing it up and like kind of putting the picture together that we've been Bob Rossedly painting throughout this entire conversation?
one of the benefits to doing it in the animation sphere was we could always point to LA and the guild and be like, well, look what they're doing. Like, look what they got. They don't work on weekends. They don't, or if they do, they get paid. You know, all that kind of stuff. You could kind of point and be like, hey, out in LA, they do this. So it was easier. It was a very easy, and also a bunch of people who work in New York animation sort of constantly have that sort of back and forth in their mind of, do I want to move to LA or not? I think I know, Smo, you've been around longer than I have. There's a flight that happens to LA at a certain point in a lot of animators' lives, that they kind of feel like the call of working in a union shop. So it was really easy to, especially for us, there was a lot of productions where there were LA productions with some people working in New York and some people working in LA, and people in New York realizing what the differences in sort of their scheduling, their pay, the benefits they get, that kind of stuff, versus what the people in LA got. So it was that part of it. It was, I think, in the conversations I had, it was very easy for people to see that dichotomy, and immediately jump to that as a solution.
Definitely.
I'm just thinking of all the friends I've lost to LA. But I've talked to people who are like, I really hope that the effort in New York is successful because I would love to move home. And they just sort of went where they knew that they had those benefits, but they didn't know that it was a thing that they could build because they were never shown by anybody, and no one ever, it takes you have to do it with your coworkers and start, and you can learn. There's places to learn. IATSE is here to help. Can I mention an author that I like? There's this great author named Jane McAlevey, who's written a lot of books on this subject, and she even has a great article, I think she wrote for Jacobin some years ago, called How to Organize Your Family Over Thanksgiving Dinner. That's sort of like a primer to this. And you can do it on a small scale. You can practice these things amongst your friends. You don't have to go amongst a smaller group of your coworkers and get used to them before you go out in the wild. You want to have a plan. But a lot of people I know for over a decade just didn't think it was even possible because they just couldn't see it. And that's why, like Dan was saying too, and I think everybody has, you're sort of showing people a vision. You're letting them come to it. But I think I jumped ahead earlier. I was talking about this. You're not really like pushing them in a direction, but you're guiding them to help them come to these conclusions that they already have, but they just haven't been able to imagine before. So you're helping people sort of open their mind to the power of working together with their coworkers to achieve a greater goal that they didn't just think could happen. They thought it had to go across the country because it was maybe better there. So it's a noble act that you're engaged in, I think, and you're really helping inspire people.
Yeah, someone in the chat brought up that Jane does classes with UC Berkeley, and they're having another training in May of next year. It's called Organizing for Power. You could sign up for their mailing list and sign up for more information on that. I've taken that course. It's great. But yeah, where was I? Anybody have anything else to add on that? I'm brain farting so hard because I've been getting over a cold for literally 2 weeks.
I think also like what Smo said about people that live outside like LA. I mean, if you're in LA, I think it's easy because you can say, well, more than half of this town is union, or aren't we union? We're kind of getting the short end of the stick. But if you're outside, I mean, yeah, if you live in New York or wherever in the country, like, LA is, you don't necessarily want to move. Like, if you're a New York person, you're very much a New York person. You probably don't even like LA. Like I know, like my one of my best friends, he's very much like a New York guy, and I think I'm more of an LA guy. But like, so You know, I like visiting New York. I don't know if I want to live there. He maybe likes visiting LA. He definitely, I know, he doesn't want to live there. But like, why should you move? Like, you know, it's like you have your whole life, especially your family, but even not. And I think that can be a big motivator too. Like, hey, we can have this here. Like, why do we need to move to LA? Like, I love New York or Texas or wherever you live. I mean, there's studios all over the country. Um, that can also kind of be a good trajectory to talk about that too.
Yeah, and I think what we're talking about here with the comparison of union and non-union employees, I think especially for game workers, it's a really easy draw to make to be like, look, there's so much crossover of union employees that enter our job arena. Like animation guild members go over to games, local 600, local 700, the camera workers, the people who work in esports production, like all of that stuff is represented with the IATSE. And like, it's easy to point to them and be like, hey, those folks come from unions. They likely know how good it was and they probably want it here. So let's do it. So I think, yeah, pensions are really important. Pensions are freaking awesome. Pensions used to be the norm in this country because we had a high volume of unionism. And now, as unions have fallen out of favor and lost their power over the course of the 80s and 90s and early aughts, pensions have become less and less common. You know who does have pensions? Government employees, police forces, some teachers.
Yeah, isn't it funny that all the politicians telling you that you don't need a union and you don't need a pension and you don't need health care all get government paid health care and pensions and all that stuff? Like, it's kind of fun, huh?
Yep.
Yeah. All the Mitch McConnells that are like heartbeat away from getting another stroke. They live very well with their pensions. Yeah, they're gonna have pensions. They're gonna have everything.
Good for the goose, but not the gander.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say like pensions, like a lot of companies, if we're talking about pensions, a lot of companies or big corporates, like, oh, we have a 401k and matching and all that stuff, and it sounds really enticing. And I think it kind of goes back to, I feel, what we talked about, like, and I think somebody said in chat, like, if you don't know what was before your time, you think that's great, that's the norm, and that's great, and yeah, 401k, whatever. But it's not really like pension is real retirement. 401ks are not real retirement. That's gambling with your retirement money for the benefit of Wall Street people and big companies and stuff. You didn't have to do that, in the past. Yeah, and a union can definitely be a way for you to get something, like to bargain for something like pensions and other things that you think are important.
I just want to read what Fearless Sun wrote in the chat. I do feel like the Hollywood system and the games industry do have a lot of similarities. Demand fluctuates, but every production requires skilled laborers and craftsfolk. They need consistent expectations regarding pay and benefits. Unions interacting became an effective way of managing all of this in film, and I think they could do similar things in games as well. Absolutely. 100% Fearless Sun. Fearless Sun is on a roll tonight. I love it. So we've introduced ourselves. I'm just going to run down it again. We have we've identified their issues. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. We've agitated around their issues. We framed it up for them, and now we're going to give them a vision of the future. We're going to be like, do you think that we should have a voice at the negotiating table with our boss? Do you think that we should have a say around the issues that affect us? And again, we're consistently asking people questions. We want them to have the answers themselves because we're not trying to convince them. We're not trying to twist arms. They should be drawing the conclusions from the way that we're having this conversation. And, sometimes you might talk to some folks who are like, no, I don't have any issues. No, I think everything's fine. And you might not even make it to this part of the conversation, and that's okay. Maybe you follow up with them later and see if you can't build some more trust and rapport with them, because maybe they're just closed off to you. Or maybe there's a better person that they could talk to once you start expanding your organizing effort. So don't write these people off, but kind of just like make note and be like, all right, great. I think that this was a really productive conversation. Thank you so much for meeting with me today. Maybe we could check in a month or two. But if you get to this point, you want to set it up to be like, okay, what can we do? Here's your issues. What do we do about it? Is the solution us coming together? What do y'all think?
One of the really important things that I've run into when dealing with conversations like this at work has been to ask someone sort of who they trust too. Not just like, do we have, like, are we the right people to make X, Y, or Z decision, but also like, who do we trust to make decisions about X, Y, and Z? And I can't speak for animation. I don't know what it's generally like, but I know that it's a team sport, kind of like making games is. And every time that I talk to somebody who's in a specific department, regardless of the department, I can say, do you think that somebody in that department over there knows what's best for you and your department and the work that you do? And they will inevitably say no, because there's an understanding that everybody who specializes in a certain thing knows how to do that thing best. And I think that's one of the ways in which I've had success leading people to a state where they're in a good position to make calls for themselves and for people that they relate to on a daily basis. It's basically that question of, who do you think is going to have your best interests in mind when big decisions start coming down the pipe? Is it going to be you and the people you work with on a daily basis, who you trust and who you know are going to be there to have your back because they have not only their interests in mind, but your similar interests that directly impact them? Like, are these the people who you think should be making decisions about your work? Or do you think it's going to be the people who are in a completely different department, like the CEO or somebody in HR? Like, do those people deal with all the same problems that you do on a daily basis? Or do you think that, like, you, or maybe even your lead, if you trust them, is going to be a better representative of your interests and the things that matter to you? And that goes not just for like organizing, it also goes for things like, who should actually make the design decision about X, Y, and Z feature in this game. And then we can branch off from there about everything else. That's the way that I've found has been really helpful in talking about these types of things.
That's awesome.
I think a lot of people, like, they already have all these answers in their head, and those questions are almost just like a spark, to set that fire that was already in them, because it's like everybody knows that, like, if you have worked in any studio, and yes, Xavier, animation is also, it's very much like a team sport. Like, you can't, like, animation is so hard to do as one person, and like I don't know, it's like every person, what they know anything about unions or anything about whatever. If you work at a studio for more than a month, you probably have a complaint about somebody that made a bad design decision, like some exec or whatever, like changing something in the project because, I don't know, they watched something the other night with their son or daughter, and now they have a completely new idea about how the project needs to be or whatever. Everybody like slowly start accumulating those frustrations that I wish they asked us, like the artist, more or whatever, but even our opinion about the project or whatever, or yeah, like unreasonable schedules. So everybody's slowly building up that frustration. As soon as it's just like about complaining about your work, it's like everybody will have something to say. Not everybody, but most people. And then most people will have that idea already in their head, and you just unlocked it with that question. I feel like, you know,
Here comes my
wow,
cat.
cat.
He's very angry. He wants dinner. Tough nuggies. Um, he just wants to say hi. Okay.
Can I chime in on this, Chris?
Yeah,
real quick?
please go ahead while I wrangle a cat.
Yeah, wrangle that cat. So this step, the education and vision step, this is, I think Dan said in the beginning, like a lot of people just don't know how a union works. They've heard about it and they think of it as a thing, the union. And so when you frame it as like, well, you and your coworkers will come up with a contract and that will, you know how right now you just get something from your company, you'll be able to negotiate what that looks like with your employer and you're legally protected. You can start to explain how it works and connect their issues and demands up with that solution. And this is your opportunity to educate people on the broader scope of things, how they can achieve their goals working together with their coworkers, and you know, also open their eyes to like that possibility. Like a lot of people didn't know that already. A lot of people just think they automatically are supposed to get a raise every year. They don't realize that like that happens to people in places because they negotiate it in their contract with the union. So like you can really connect everything up here, give them that path forward and kind of get them excited. So you've got that vision and that education happening at the same time.
Definitely.
On that same point, again, because animation had the LA union prior to us, you know, organizing our workplace, people would often point to it and kind of be like during this part of the conversation, they'd probably point to that and just say like can we have that? Like can we have something like that? Like you could have something like it, but our thing will be tailored to our priorities because, you know, for instance, like a thing that often came up with us was about the like transport into the studio. In LA, there's a car-based culture, so you drive it. In New York, that's not the case. No one at the studio owns a car, essentially, right? So it's a different priority than they would have, right? And so you start to accumulate those kinds of things and realize that our solutions will be tailor-made to our problems and our issues at work, and educating folks about that part of it. It's easy to just think some other entity's going to swoop in, just drop you a contract, and that's going to be it. Like that's going to solve all your problems. Well, no, the actual reality of it is we're going to have more conversations and figure out more about what we specifically want at this place and what changes we need to make here. And so that part of the education was always interesting to see folks that sort of light switch of like, oh, the things that are important to me specifically and to our unit specifically are going to be the things that need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yes.
Like thinking about how it's so prioritized around what we struggle with and not a one size fits all is really important.
Maybe like a question to Dan and Smo, because I find that aspect maybe like very interesting, and I feel like very very important. Like if you could maybe talk about maybe even more stuff that perhaps you encountered, more like questions from people you encountered about kind of what you said, like what is a union, how it works, because I feel like it used to be such a prominent thing, like in this country, for example. But I think you have people that are like, oh, my dad used to be in a union, whatever, but and not even that most of the time. And there is like that sometimes even that counter propaganda from studios of like, oh, the unions are this outside entity, or like union bosses or whatever. They're gonna like tell you how to do things. And what did you encounter like maybe like what kind of misconceptions and stuff or whatever that you encountered in your conversation with your coworkers, if you had something like that?
Well, I suppose anything coming to mind for you directly? I'm trying to think about what exactly. The only thing I can think of was, um, there is a there's like a history of like, I think maybe in New York in general. I don't know if this is true across, but like this weird idea of like unions and the mob, and sort of like strong arming and that kind of stuff. Idea of like, oh, I don't want to be part of a thing that kind of strong arms folks into it, and realize like, no, the union in this case is going to be made up of you and all your coworkers. It's not going to be an outside entity that's going to force you to do things. You know, you're a part of this thing. That was a big thing. The other big misconception about in New York that I came into was kind of similar in that the thinking of like, we'll just copy the New York the LA contract. Like, are they just gonna kind of like copy our contract kind of thing? It's like, no. Again, it's gonna have to be tailor made to us. I'm trying to think of other. I think a lot of people have questions about dues and how that worked, and how it works with like New York is very much like a gig economy when it comes to working. You work on a project for a month or two and then jump to another project. Like, how will that work? Things like that. I think were mostly the questions they had.
In all of the talking to people I've done over the span of time that I've done it, which I won't reveal, I only had one person who was like virulently anti-union and like very Ayn Rand, like had like complete misconceptions of everything, and I couldn't unpack it all. I was like, I don't know where to start with this. And then in that case, I was able to go to a colleague at the Animation Guild or at the IATSE to help me figure out rebuttals to some of these like outlandish questions, because it was just like, and you go through and you do assess somebody's likelihood to, or like how amenable they are, but like it's very rare. But every once in a while you'll meet somebody who's like off the deep end, where they've got this pure fiction of like how everything works, and we can unpack it to a degree we can, and when we can't, we have people to help us with who are more knowledgeable about these like specific things. But Chrissy and everybody, I just wanted to say I have to go. I have to get ready and prepare for my class. But thank you for having me, and it's good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for
all.
coming, Smo.
And
it was awesome to have you.
yeah, and everybody out there, the power is yours, and you can do this too. So
Hell yeah.
good luck and solidarity, and I'm excited to hear good things from all of you.
Hell yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, Smo.
That's
So appreciate you coming, Smo. Now that you signed off, but Smo's awesome. We have 3 more steps. We'll get through them. Let me readjust this window now that it's a different dimension. So next step in this conversation is to inoculate your coworker. And by inoculation, I don't mean that you're going to give them a vaccine in their arm. I mean, you are going to address their fears. What are they afraid of? What do you think your boss is going to do in the event that you all organize? So what do you think your boss is going to... How do you think that your boss is going to react if we announce that we want a collective voice on the job? And a lot of people will most likely say, well, I think they're going to fire us. But this part of the conversation is where you're helping people understand what their fears are, what are they afraid of that might happen, and help them process that fear. So either the thing they're mentioning is illegal, not something that your boss is allowed to do under the National Labor Relations Act, or it's something that is seated in myth, and like Smo mentioned earlier, the idea of our jobs being outsourced. If they could have outsourced our jobs, they would have done it already. And your boss is using that as a tool to keep you quiet. They like that you think that way. They like that you feel that way, but it's not the truth. So this part of the conversation is really helping them recognize their inner power, so that they could more confidently move forward with all of us in a bargaining unit. Um, Anybody have any like other common things that they hear from people about what their fears from their bosses might be?
Well, to touch on and jump off of the the outsourcing thing, one of the things that I like to bring up to sort of counter that fear, because I've heard it a few times, especially when doing like phone banks, talking with game workers, and them being worried that they're just going to hire somebody else. Yeah, if they could, they would. But also, have you dealt with outsourcers before? Because the amount of work that it takes to get outsourced work to work with everything else, regardless of what it is, whether it's matching standards or being in the right file format or any number of other things, is a job in and of itself. It's a full-time job that one or more people has to do for a given section of a production, regardless of what the production is. It could be a game or an animation or whatever. Outsourcing is a huge pain. And just because it might be a little bit cheaper to like buy an asset from China or something doesn't mean that it's actually cheaper to do it. It just means that your boss has shoved off some of the I don't know, the responsibility onto somebody else. So if outsourcing is a fear, and we're afraid of some other stuff, how can we kind of like break down what we're talking about into more manageable chunks? Like outsourcing being a thing that you have to kind of deal with instead of outsourcing being a solution, is one way of framing all these other fears and saying, okay, if that's what outsourcing looks like, what are these other things that we're afraid of? Are we afraid that they're going to like retaliate? Or are they going to, take away bonuses or something? Okay, why would they do that? How do we know that they are or are not going to do that? And what can we do to either mitigate the risk or work around it, or just show each other, hey, this isn't the problem we think it is. It's just either maybe fear mongering from, the top down, or maybe it's literally just a myth. Like, there's no mafia involved in like SAG-AFTRA or something, because what kind of mafia person would want to be involved with that? We don't have to worry about that. When talking about those fears, those are the types of things that I like to bring up. It's like, if outsourcing is such a pain in the ass, what else would be a pain in the ass for them to, do if suddenly you unionize or you just get a little bit more organized, even if you're not in a union?
I would say also maybe a good counter to the fear the fear of being fired. I mean, beyond that, yeah, it is illegal to fire you for trying to organize, but it also doesn't mean that an employer might still risk it to do something illegal, then you're still fired. I mean, and I think first of all, before countering any fear, it is important, I think, to like acknowledge it and be empathetic, and not just immediately like, well, actually, and like actually like like be empathetic to the person, because their fears are valid. They come from a valid place. But something to maybe um say afterwards, can be like, you know um yeah, maybe we can like all just put our heads down to the grindstone and be quiet from the fear of getting fired. But it's like, is there going to be a future in this industry? Or there's like this whole concept of it's a race to the bottom, because they're not gonna like stop. If it's bad now, it's gonna get worse. Like, corporate, if you work for a big corporation, if you work for a publicly traded company, they want to make more and more profit. They're going to cut more and more corners. You're going to see your friends gonna be let go. You're going to get eventually let go. And it's like, or there's the conditions are going to be so unbearable, and the pay is not going to be worth it. So you're going to hand, can be next year, it can be 10 years from now. It doesn't matter. But it's like you can wake up one day when like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and like I'm working for peanuts, I'm at work, I haven't seen my partner in like days, and now I don't have any other skills and I'm too old to break into another industry. And all I did is just put my nose to the grindstone, and I was like a good worker, from the fear of being fired. And then what, you could have done something about it, years ago, and organized and actually, try to make that industry or your studio, whatever, a sustainable workplace with like a future for everybody, including yourself.
It's like that phrase about like the best time to plant the tree is 10 years ago. The second best time is right now. I feel the same way about unions,
Yeah.
right? But one of the things when I was doing my one-on-ones talking about retaliation or fears from what the company will do, I had a lot of success in redirecting the question after they explain what their fears were, and you validate the fears and you talk about them. The question I found myself asking was, well, what will we do when they do that? What can you and I do when they do that? Like, are they going to fire all of us? Okay, well, they're going to fire you. I'm going to leave. Are they gonna lose this entire department if they do that, or if they're gonna make us do mandatory meetings to run anti-union videos or whatever? What can we do during that meeting? They can't stop us from laughing at it or whatever being silly about it, right? So that kind of idea of like, and again, this conversation that we have when we talk about one-on-ones is mostly asking questions and listening. So any way you can sort of not combat their fears necessarily, but ask them to combat their own fears is sort of always going to be beneficial to the conversation, and always going to be helpful to allow people to kind of come up with their own solutions, which is sort of the point of a union, right? We through our collective power, we figure out solutions to these problems.
Yeah, I think y'all brought up a lot of really great points, like the idea of not initially debunking their fears, but again helping them process it. Like, what is it about it that you're afraid of? I also agree that could be quite scary. Here are your rights under the law that can protect you in these situations. But ultimately reminding them that we have power in numbers, and that when we stand together, we can make these changes, which leads to the next part of the conversation, which is calling the question. You're going to straight up ask, coworker of mine, will you vote yes for a union? Will you stand in solidarity with your coworkers and say, yes, I too want a union? Because this is the most important part of this conversation, because you need to get an answer. You can't skip this part, because if you leave this conversation and you don't know how they feel about it, then you don't know how they feel about it. The answer can also be, I'm not sure. I need more information. It doesn't have to be yes, no. It could be yes, no, or maybe, or I'm not sure. And all that an I'm not sure means is that you need to ask them more questions, like, what can I help clarify for you? Or do you have more questions about what this entails that I could answer? Or maybe you just follow up at a later date. You say, okay, no problem. Maybe we could talk about this another time. Whatever feels most comfortable in the moment. If somebody ultimately says no, you're like, okay, that's your right. That's fine. Thank you so much for talking to me. Maybe we could follow up in a couple of months, or like a month or two, a couple of weeks, whatever your timeline is for your campaign. It could all depend. Because a no answer is an answer, and that's fine. That's within their right to say no. And if they say yes, fantastic. Great. Love that. How about we move on to the next part of this conversation, which is giving them a task. So they say, yes, I will vote yes. Great. Well, how much of a yes is that? Is that a yes, I will help you do this effort? I will help you by joining your organizing committee and having these conversations with our coworkers? Or yes, I'm in, but I don't have the time to commit. So you can count on my vote, but I can't help. But they can help in some minor ways. Do they have contact information for another coworker? Is there a coworker that they look to when they have issues? Because we also want to help us to identify who the leaders are at our studio. And by leaders, I don't mean seniors or leads or management. I mean people that they look to for guidance, that are social leaders. And any contact information they have for anybody else at the company, because that is truly helpful to what we're doing. We need to get in touch with everybody. So if they know somebody that we don't have the contact info for yet, that is so helpful. So if they're not willing to do direct outreach like we're doing with our one-on-ones, getting them to help us fill in the blanks of the information that we need is also incredibly helpful. Any other tasks y'all could think of to give people?
I just want to actually touch something important that you said about the social leaders, because sometimes in like a studio hierarchy, you look at like your lead supervisors and all that stuff as the leadership, but when it comes to organizing, you know, the PA that's been working for like six months or something might be that social leader. It might be the person who's like super social and super fired up, and it's not about like how long you worked in the industry or in the studio or what's your position, you know. And I think also like if you recognize that person, like to empower them, but sometimes, especially I feel like if you're just starting, it's like, oh, I'm just been working for a year, like I don't know, but I have all these thoughts and all these feelings that, you know, they're good, they're valid. That person, you know, could be the leader, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, there was something in the chat that I think maybe is like
Yeah, I was gonna address Fearless Son.
addressing. Yeah.
Fearless Son says, my fear is that while retaliation might be illegal, I know that won't stop upper management, who will happily eat the fines if it means they stop a union from forming. It doesn't help that I work in an at-will state, so retaliation is even harder to prove when they could point to a contract someone signed as a condition of work that says that either party could terminate an employment agreement at any time for any reason. I need to address my own fear before I can address the fear in anyone else. Valid, Fearless Son. I don't want to say that organizing is without risk. There is risk involved in what we're doing. But the rewards, in my personal opinion, outweigh the risk. Because like you said, your employer can terminate your employment at any time for any reason. But once we form a union, we're no longer at-will employees. And what we hope to enshrine in your contract is what's called just cause, which means that your employer has to have a reason to fire you, and they have to prove it. So finding the power and the strength within yourself to move forward with an organizing effort, knowing that there is risk involved, but on the other side of it, that risk of being fired without your consent or for any reason without just cause is eliminated. So, you know, I completely understand that fear though, because I think a lot of us feel it, and I certainly felt it while we were going through our effort at Titmouse, and I was even worried that on the other side of it, I'd never work again. But none of that ever came to fruition, and I'm not saying that it's like never going to happen to you or anyone ever, but you know, I just think that again, like the risk is there, but the rewards are great. It is a fight.
One of the reasons I think that IATSE and TAG and other unions rely on a supermajority is for that same reason, right? That fear, the more people you have on your side, that fear starts to diminish more and more. If you know that 80% of the place you're working at has your back on this issue, then the fear of getting fired is not eliminated, but it is diminished, because you start to think, well, I know I have, 80% of the studio with me, so we can do something collectively to rectify this wrong, and they'll stand with me and do something about it. To jump on Yaron's point about the PA being the leader or being the go-to person, we were super lucky to have production folks in our organizing committee, and animators are a bunch of artists. We don't do a lot of like spreadsheets. So having production folks who their strength is spreadsheets and organizing and that kind of stuff was super helpful. So finding ways to do that, like one of the tasks we tasked someone with was to keep us up to date on who was being hired at the studio, and they had access to who was being hired. And so every week we got a report that was like, here's who's at the studio now. Great, now we know who to reach out to. And stuff like that. And really utilizing folks' individual talents outside of just the work they do in terms of what they can achieve. A lot of it was, like Chrissy said, just getting content information for other people there. A lot of the New York animation scene is small, so a lot of people are roommates with other folks who are, so it's like, can you talk to your roommate about talking to me? And that kind of stuff. Yeah, so finding these alternate routes to how they can help out besides just doing what they're hired to do.
Yeah, jumping off of that directly, in games, there's also this production staff who, they're the spreadsheet royalty, and they know exactly how the entire production is running, because that's their responsibility. It's to know what everybody's doing so that they can make sure all the parts mesh together. And those are some of the most valuable people to build good relationships with, and those good relationships are going to not just be good for the work that you're doing, but also for the organizing that you're doing, because they're literally the most organized people at your studio, and they're probably the people who are going to immediately see the benefits of a unionization effort, because if they know that everybody is on the same page about, we want to have X, Y, and Z rights or things baked into a contract that are going to produce some stability, then those are the people who are going to be like, yeah, I want that type of stability. I want the people who are a little bit messy and disorganized to maybe get a little more organized. All the artists and other people who are used to just kind of being siloed into their little roles. Those are the people who are going to be like, oh yeah, please bring them together, put them all in the same room, make them make a decision, because they see that so rarely. So, not like buttering people up, but more like trying to develop those relationships with the people whose job is already organizing, and saying, hey, I want to organize. I want you to help me organize. I want to be better organized, and I want to be organized in such a way that it will make everybody's life easier. I can think of several people, several producers who I have met and worked with extensively, who would be like, yes, please. Do the thing, just so that we have less stress to deal with. I want all of you talking to each other, because it's going to bring down my level of already insane stress, and it's going to make the relationships across the studio better, blah, 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 blah. So even if you have, just say, a junior producer on your team who, it's maybe their first job in the industry, but they're on top of it, and they kind of are a go-getter because they want to prove that they're, valuable to the team. That might be the exact right person to help you organize your studio, because they're already trying to prove that they can do that. So why not try to prove that they can do it in an even more productive way that's production, no pun intended, in an even more productive way that's going to help not only their job, but also like their career growth and everything else. Like there's so much impetus for that person to do this anyway. So that might actually be, from the get-go, the right person to help you with it, because so many producers are also like very outgoing people. You want those people to be sort of on your side, and it's just like the right thing it's the right structure to approach.
Yeah. So we're finally at the end, which the last step is to follow up. Simple enough. Hey, coworker, it was so nice talking to you today. How about we follow up in like a week and I could get that contact information from you? Or can we touch base again in like 2 or 3 weeks and see if you were able to talk to so and so if they had volunteered to do that task? But you do want to make sure that you set up a time and place to meet again because we have to have these conversations consistently. Oh my goodness. Hold on. I'm sorry, I have another meeting that bumps up right with this one. So speaking of, anyway, we got to follow up with our coworkers so that we can make sure that they're up to date on what our campaign timeline is looking like, where we're at in the process. Maybe they've got more concerns they'd like to talk about. Maybe they have more fears they'd like to talk about. And especially for people who said they weren't sure about whether or not they would vote yes or no, like those are definitely people we need to follow up with. So scheduling a time and a place for a future meeting. Oh, Fearless Son, you are so kind, but I am here for y'all. I am here for everyone in the games community to get the information that they need. So don't sweat it. I already told these folks I would be late. So don't worry. Appreciate your kindness though. But I do want to real quick just go through a rundown of the entire conversation because we did go over a ton of steps today and we had a lot of conversation about each and every step, which I think is fantastic. And I do really want to thank Yaron, Dan, and Xavier and Smo for joining me today because they had such incredible things to add to what would have been a very lackluster conversation with just myself. So I so appreciate y'all being here. I can't thank you enough. It means so much for y'all to come. But number one, we set up the conversation. Hey, coworker, can we meet for coffee? I want to talk to you about something. Introduce yourself. Hey, coworker, it's me, your gal, Chrissy. I kind of want to find out more about how you feel about how things are going at work. What do you think? Then you want to identify their issues. What are the issues? What are the top 3 things that you would ask to change at work? What would you like to change? Then you want to agitate around those issues. So how can we negotiate for change for that? Like, those are your problems. What can we do about it? You want to frame it up and be like, okay, what would happen if we came together collectively to try to solve those issues? If you can't negotiate individually for change, what would happen if we came together? Then you want to give them the vision of the future. We could have that seat at the negotiating table with our boss if we come together as a group. What do you think? Then you want to inoculate them. What are their fears? What are the things they're afraid your boss might do in the event that y'all organize? Help them process that. And figure out what their rights are as a laborer under the National Labor Relations Act. Then you want to ask them the question, will you stand in solidarity with your coworkers and vote yes for a union? Then you want to give them a task. Great. I'm so glad that you're in favor. Would you be able to get me in touch with so-and-so? Would you be able to get so-and-so's information? And then you want to set a follow-up date, which is next Thursday, same time, same place on this very Twitch channel. We'll be talking about something else. But you do want to set a follow-up time to meet with your coworkers so that you continue to update them about where you are in the process, as well as address any future concerns that they might have. Keep the conversation going. Keep the door open. We got each other's backs. We're here for one another. We're here to support and stand in solidarity. We got you. We got this. Let's do it. Any parting words from y'all? Anything y'all want to say before we go?
There is maybe just to maybe try to answer another thing that Fearless Son mentioned in the chat about producers in the studio. Talking about producers, they're usually full-time in their experience, while they manage or contractors and external vendors. I would just maybe say to that, I mean, if there's a kind of maybe a high kind of ranking, I guess, high level producer that you think they really only just they basically represent the entrance of the studio, then I mean they probably don't have the workers' interest in mind, so they probably shouldn't be part of that organizing conversation, and it's part of not talking on work channels, talking off of where using whatever and but yeah, those people still, they have their PAs, they have their production coordinators, they have all those other people, and trust me, they have their even if those people are full-time, I'm sure they have a lot of issues that they want to address, like recently, like now I work at Sony, but before that I worked at Nickelodeon not that long ago, and Nickelodeon production workers, they were not part of the Animation Guild bargaining agreement, and they organized to be part of TAG, and they had a really great campaign. They succeeded, and now they're part of like the new contract negotiation that's happening at Nickelodeon, and it's and they had they were full-time too in a studio that's union, but they were not part of it. They had so much exploitation, so much problems, and that motivated them. And I'm pretty sure at your studio, whatever other studio, production workers are probably experiencing similar or other problems that they will organize behind.
Yeah, and ultimately what we want to achieve for game workers is a wall-to-wall union, which would include those in production titles, depending upon whether or not they are actually management level. So that would be something that we'd need to discuss and figure out specifically for your company, because every company operates differently. And Fearless Son, I just want to encourage you that if you are considering a strategy to move forward at where you're working, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself, cfellmeth at iatsi.net, or you could go to gameworkers.org and fill out the contact and organizer form, or just fill out our survey and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But if you want a direct route to talking to me more immediately, please go to our website and fill out the contact and organizer form, and that'll go directly to me, and we could talk more about strategizing at your studio or wherever it is that you're working. But I hate to have to rush off, but I gotta jump. Again, so awesome having y'all. So awesome having everybody in the chat join as well. I'm beside myself with the amount of conversation we've had tonight. In fact, my throat is now sore because I've been talking all day. But we'll be here next Thursday, same time, same place. Talking about something else. I don't know what that is yet. Surprise. We'll find out on Thursday. I hope you all have a great week. And we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.